June 2023. The heat was a suffocating blanket outside the abandoned Northgate Quarry, 7 miles north of Blackwood Lake, Maine. State Trooper Ava Sharma's flashlight beam cut through the mineral-rich dust, illuminating a site that felt frozen in a long-past decade. Dispatch: I need a perimeter secured at the old Northgate site. Send the forensics team and notify the chief medical examiner. She radioed, her voice tight, echoing against the slate walls. What started as a search for a missing piece of mining equipment had just become an entirely different kind of discovery. One that would finally provide an answer to a question that had haunted Blackwood Lake County for 38 years. 2 sets of remains were found concealed deep within a flooded, recently drained section of the quarry. Nearby, a distinctive gold signet ring with the initials CR, the same ring Corey Reynolds was wearing the night he vanished alongside his childhood friend, Devon Clark, in 1985. For nearly 4 decades, the disappearance of the young men had been nothing but questions without answers. 2 ambitious young men who simply vanished one summer evening after finishing their shifts at O'Malley's lumber yard. 2 empty seats at every graduation, every wedding, every family gathering. 2 futures their parents could never stop mourning, until now. The discovery at Northgate Quarry wasn't just the end of a missing persons case. It was the first domino in a sequence that would expose decades of secrets buried in this small Maine community. Because when authorities finally identified a suspect and made an arrest in 2023, it wasn't a transient worker or an unknown predator. It was someone the community knew, someone they trusted, someone who had walked among them for 38 years carrying this terrible secret. The Reynolds-Clark case represents more than just a solved mystery. It stands as a testament to the persistence of 2 families who never stopped searching, detectives who refused to let the case file gather dust, and advances in forensic geology that finally gave voice to victims long silenced. This is also a story about a divided community. When the young men first disappeared in 1985, suspicion tore through Blackwood Lake County like wildfire. Neighbors accused neighbors. Families stopped speaking. The search for the missing men revealed the fault lines running beneath the surface of small-town America. Lines that would crack wide open when the truth finally emerged 38 years later. What makes this case particularly haunting is how close the answer was all along. The key suspect had been interviewed in the original investigation but managed to slip through the cracks. For decades, this person attended community vigils for the missing men, looked their parents in the eye, and maintained a facade of innocence while harboring unimaginable secrets. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I'm always fascinated to see how far these stories travel and how they connect us across distances. Tonight we'll walk through the events of June 1985, trace the decades-long search for answers, and reveal the stunning breakthrough that finally brought closure to one of Maine's most baffling cold cases. This is a story of loss, persistence, deception, and ultimately justice delayed but not denied. Blackwood Lake County, Maine in Model 5 was a place where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. With just over 18,000 residents scattered across rocky coastline and dense pine forests, it was a community known for its resilience and tightly knit nature. The county seat of Port Stonington, with its historic harbor and quiet main street, served as the beating heart of local commerce and gossip. The mid-1980s brought changes to this corner of Maine. The fishing industry was facing decline, and the local lumber yards, which had sustained the economy for decades, were struggling against global competition. Economic anxiety loomed, though the region's natural beauty still drew in a modest summer tourism crowd. O'Malley's lumberyard sat near the old railroad tracks, its neon sign casting a yellow glow over the dusty lot each evening. The yard served as a hub for local workers, where loggers discussed timber prices and high schoolers worked summer jobs to save for college. It was at O'Malley's that Corey Reynolds and Devon Clark had found summer work after graduating from Port Stonington High School in 1984. The two young men were inseparable. Corey, tall at 6'1", with sun-bleached hair and a confident demeanor, was the more practical one. He planned to enroll in the Maritime Academy in the fall, hoping to become a commercial ship engineer. Devon, 5'10", with dark curly hair and an easygoing smile, was the dreamer. He played guitar in a local band and talked about moving to Boston to pursue a career in music production. June 28, 1985, began as an ordinary Friday. The friends arrived for their late shift at O'Malley's at 4 p.m., wearing matching green safety vests and heavy work boots. The lumberyard was closing early that day. A small fire at a neighboring mill had shut down deliveries, and the foreman had decided to send the crew home early. Security camera footage, grainy and black and white, but preserved as evidence, shows the men stacking finished planks, laughing together as they worked. At 9:12 p.m., they clocked out, collected their paychecks, and waved goodbye to the night watchman. "See you Monday," Corey called out, the last words anyone at O'Malley's would ever hear him speak. The men's routine walk home took them down Elm Street, past the old cannery, and then 3 blocks along Harborview Drive to the modest apartment they shared above a bait shop. The route was familiar and mostly quiet. On that particular evening, witnesses reported seeing the two friends stop at the Corner Stop convenience store to purchase a pack of cigarettes and 2 cans of soda. The clerk at the Corner Stop, Mr. Frank O'Connell, was the last known person to see Corey and Devon alive. They seemed in good spirits, he told investigators. Corey asked about the Red Sox game. Devon was humming a tune. They left around 9:40 p.m., heading toward Harbor View. The distance from the Corner Stop to their apartment was approximately 7 minutes on foot. When the men hadn't arrived by 10:30 p.m., Devon's mother, Alice, who had planned to visit, began to worry. By midnight, she had called O'Malley's and learned her son and Corey had left hours earlier. By 1 a.m., Devon's father, Thomas Clark, was driving the streets of Port Stonington, looking for any sign of the young men. At 2 a.m., the Clark and Reynolds families jointly reported Corey and Devon missing to the Blackwood Lake County Sheriff's Department. "We didn't take it seriously at first," admitted former Deputy Sheriff Jim Hayes in a 2023 interview. "2 young men out late on a Friday. We thought they were probably at a party or just missed curfew. We told the families to wait until morning." But morning came with no sign of the young men. No calls, no messages. Their apartment remained locked and undisturbed. By noon on June 29th, the family's concern had infected the community. Friends, neighbors, and co-workers gathered at the Clarks' home, organizing search parties. The sheriff's department, now recognizing the seriousness of the situation, began interviewing potential witnesses and tracing the young men's last known movements. The search expanded rapidly. Volunteers combed every inch of the route between O'Malley's and the apartment. They checked abandoned boats, seaside shacks, and wooded areas on the outskirts of town. The local radio station interrupted regular programming with updates and appeals for information. "It was unlike anything I'd seen before," recalled Port Stonington resident Martha Jennings. "Everyone dropped what they were doing to help search. The cannery shut down for a day. Finding those boys became the only thing that mattered. By the third day, the Maine State Police had joined the investigation. They interviewed the young men's friends, co-workers, and acquaintances. They examined the apartment, finding nothing out of place. Their savings passbooks were still on the kitchen counter. Their few pieces of jewelry were untouched, except for Corey's gold signet ring, which he typically wore daily. The most puzzling aspect of the case was the complete absence of evidence. No signs of struggle were found along their walking route. No suspicious vehicles had been reported in the area. The friends had simply vanished into the summer evening, leaving no trace behind. It was as if they'd been swallowed by the fog. Thomas Clark told reporters a week after the disappearance, his voice breaking. "My boys wouldn't run away. They wouldn't leave their families. Something happened to them, and someone knows what it is." As days turned to weeks, the search continued, but hope diminished. Posters with the young men's photographs appeared in store windows throughout Blackwood Lake County and neighboring towns. Their smiling faces looked out from the front page of the Port Stonington Chronicle newspaper for 5 consecutive days. A local record, the moment Corey Reynolds and Devin Clark were reported missing, marked the beginning of Blackwood Lake County's innocence lost. Doors that had never been locked were now secured with deadbolts. A community that had once prided itself on its safety now harbored an unseen threat, and the knowledge that 2 of their own had vanished without a trace. The Sheriff's Department of 1985 was ill-equipped to handle a case of this magnitude. With a total force of just 9 deputies serving the entire county, their experience was largely limited to minor theft, boating violations, and occasional bar fights. Sheriff Harold Dobson, a 3-term incumbent, known more for his folksy charm than his investigative prowess, found himself thrust into a regional spotlight as the case captured media attention. "We're pursuing all available leads," became Dobson's stock phrase at daily press briefings, though former deputies would later admit the investigation lacked both direction and expertise in those crucial early days. The first 48 hours after the disappearance yielded little physical evidence. Deputies canvassed the route, finding nothing more suspicious than a discarded plastic fishing lure near the corner of Harbor View and Ocean Lane. The lure was initially thought to belong to Devon, who enjoyed fishing, but was later determined to have no connection to the case. Without a crime scene, investigators focused on establishing a timeline and identifying potential witnesses. This effort produced the case's first significant lead: a dark blue van seen idling near the corner stop around the time the men would have been passing by. 3 separate witnesses mentioned the vehicle: a retired fisherman walking his dog, a woman gardening on a nearby porch, and the night baker at the Port Stonington bakery. All described a late 1970s model Dodge van with a distinctive rusty ladder rack and a partial license plate containing the letters JB. None could clearly identify the driver, though the baker thought it might have been a man with a beard wearing a baseball cap. This blue van became the investigation's first focal point. A list was compiled of all dark blue Dodge vans registered in Blackwood Lake County and surrounding areas, 89 vehicles in total. Deputies began the painstaking process of locating each one, interviewing owners, and checking for signs of recent cleaning or damage repair. The van's owner was identified on July 6th, 8 days after the disappearance: George Sterling, a 48-year-old owner of a small roofing company who lived 7 miles out of town. Sterling admitted to being in the area that evening but denied any involvement with the young men's Disappearance. I was dropping off a load of tools for an early start the next morning. Sterling told investigators, headed straight home after that. His wife corroborated his story, claiming he arrived home by 10:30 p.m., with no evidence to contradict his account and no legal grounds for a search warrant. Investigators were forced to accept Sterling's explanation, though he remained on their informal suspect list. As the investigation continued, 2 additional persons of interest emerged. Robert Bobby Allen, a 25-year-old former co-worker of Corey and Devon at O'Malley's. Allen had been fired 3 weeks before the disappearance after an argument with Corey over a safety violation. Allen claimed to have been fishing at his cabin on the other side of the lake the night of June 28th, an alibi confirmed by his brother, who was fishing with him. Mr. Silas Vance, the 61-year-old owner of Vance Quarry Operations, which operated the Northgate Quarry where the remains would eventually be found. Anonymous tips suggested Vance was aggressively hostile toward any trespassing and had been seen arguing with young people near the quarry's perimeter days before the disappearance. Vance denied any connection to the case and pointed to his presence at a business convention in Boston that weekend, an alibi confirmed by multiple witnesses. By early August, the investigation had stalled. The state police, which had initially provided significant resources, began scaling back its involvement as more pressing cases demanded attention. Local law enforcement continued to follow up on tips and leads, but with diminishing returns. The lack of physical evidence hampered the investigation from the start. Most problematic were the sightings that began to pour in from across New England. The young men were reportedly spotted at a truck stop in Connecticut, a ferry terminal in Massachusetts, and a bar in Vermont. Each sighting diverted precious resources as investigators were obligated to follow up, only to find dead ends. The case might have maintained momentum had it not been for a major winter storm in December 1985 that caused catastrophic flooding, destroying key sections of the evidence storage facility and damaging some of the initial reports. The Reynolds-Clark case, with its lack of concrete leads, was quietly deprioritized. As 1985 gave way to 1986, the disappearance of Corey Reynolds and Devon Clark transitioned from breaking news to unsolved mystery to local legend. Parents used their story to warn children about walking alone after dark. Anniversary articles appeared in the local paper each June. The families continued their private search, but the official investigation had effectively gone dormant. What time is it where you're watching? Let me know in the comments below. Day or night, someone somewhere is still searching for answers in cases just like this one. In the Clark and Reynolds households, time stopped on June 28, 1985. The family. Calendars remained turned to that month for years, the day circled in red ink, a silent testament to the moment their world shattered. For Thomas and Alice Clark, and Paul and Sarah Reynolds, life became divided into 2 distinct periods, before the disappearance and after. Thomas Clark, Devon's father, had always been a man defined by meticulous planning. A retired chief engineer for the local ferry system, he had built a reputation for solving mechanical problems that baffled others. My father was the kind of man who fixed things, his younger daughter Elara recalled in a 2023 interview. If something broke, he'd repair it. If there was a problem, he'd solve it. When my brother vanished, it was the first time I ever saw him face something he couldn't fix, and it nearly destroyed him. 3 weeks after the young men disappeared, Thomas took an indefinite leave of absence from his job. He transformed his basement into a makeshift command center for his own investigation. Maps of Blackwood Lake County covered the walls, with red pins marking every location searched, and blue pins indicating reported sightings. A dedicated phone line, the number distributed on homemade flyers throughout Maine and neighboring states, rang directly to this headquarters. Thomas's days followed a grueling routine. Mornings began at dawn with physical searches of areas overlooked by official efforts. Afternoons were spent following up on tips, interviewing potential witnesses, and coordinating with the network of volunteers who continued to assist long after official search parties disbanded. While Thomas channeled his grief into relentless action, Alice Clark and Sarah Reynolds turned inward, finding solace in faith and the unshakable belief that their sons would return. The Clarks' living room became a shrine of sorts. Photographs of the young men arranged around a central portrait, taken just months before they vanished. Most poignant was Alice's evening ritual, each night at 10 p.m., the approximate time the young men should have arrived home. She would leave the porch light on and sit by the front window, watching the street, until midnight or later. "My mother never said they were dead," Ilara explained. Not once in 38 years did those words cross her lips. She would say they were missing or away, but never gone forever. As the years passed, the family's struggle became a part of Blackwood Lake County's collective identity. Their story was told to each new generation. Their unwavering commitment in the face of overwhelming odds earned them a unique place in the community's heart. Blackwood Lake County transformed dramatically in the decades following the disappearance. The sleepy fishing community of 1912 gradually gave way to summer condos and a seasonal tourist economy. O'Malley's lumberyard closed in 1998, replaced by a series of businesses, an antique shop, a microbrewery, and eventually a seaside bistro. The corner stop was bought out by a national convenience store chain. Through these changes, the case remained an unhealed wound in the community's psyche. Each transformation of the physical landscape seemed to erase another potential clue. The investigation wasn't entirely dormant. Every 5 years, media attention would resurface around the anniversary of the disappearance. In 1995, the case received its first major review when Sheriff Dobson lost his re-election bid to Captain Michael Vance. No relation to Silas Vance, a former state police detective who had campaigned on a promise to solve the county's most notorious cold case. Tucker assembled a task force that spent 6 months re-examining evidence and re-interviewing witnesses. The advent of DNA analysis in criminal investigations sparked hope in 2003, when Sheriff's Department officials announced they would re-examine physical evidence using these new techniques. Unfortunately, the limited evidence collected in 1985 had been improperly stored, rendering most samples degraded beyond usefulness. The new millennium brought fresh eyes to the case when the Maine State Police established a cold case unit in 2010. The Reynolds-Clark disappearance was among the first files reviewed. Investigators digitized the original case notes, created computer models of possible scenarios, and established a dedicated tip line. The most promising lead came in 2015 when a former employee of Vance Quarry Operations claimed in a deathbed confession that he had helped his former boss, Silas Vance, drain a section of the Northgate Quarry a week after the disappearance, only to immediately refill it without explanation. This tip was dismissed by investigators as unreliable due to the source's impaired health, but the location, the Northgate Quarry, was now in the file. October 12, 2022, a crisp autumn day, almost identical to the one 37 years earlier. Trooper Ava Sharma wasn't thinking about the Reynolds-Clark case as she responded to reports of water contamination near the abandoned Northgate Quarry. The quarry's pump system, long dormant, had failed, necessitating the controlled drainage of a lower-level holding pit for environmental inspection. Sharma expected another routine call, issue warnings and fill out paperwork. What she found instead would finally break open Blackwood Lake County's most notorious cold case. I noticed something odd about the water flow in the lower pit, Sharma later testified. There was a barrier that looked newer than the others, a collapsed section of slate and gravel that didn't match the surrounding area. It seemed deliberately altered, not a natural cave-in. Curious, Sharma used a grappling hook to remove several large pieces of slate, revealing what lay hidden behind the makeshift wall. The remains of two individuals positioned side by side in a small alcove carved into the quarry wall. Fragments of clothing still clung to the bones, remnants of what forensic analysts would later confirm were identical green lumberyard uniforms, and there, partially buried in the damp silt, a tarnished gold signet ring with the initials CR engraved on its face. I knew immediately what I'd found, Sharma said. Everyone who grows up in Blackwood Lake County knows about the missing boys. I'd seen their pictures 100 times in the old police files. Finding them was like coming face to face with local history. The discovery site was immediately secured. The Maine State Police, the FBI, and the Cold Case Unit established a joint task force within hours. The quarry became the center of the most significant forensic operation in county history. The first piece of the puzzle came from the quarry's historical records. The section where the remains were found had been part of a temporary storage pit for excavated slate. Records indicated the pit had been drained and sealed only once in its history, in late June 1985, to allow for an environmental inspection that was later canceled. This explained why searchers hadn't checked the area in 1985. It was presumed to be a working pit, not a potential burial site. The forensic examination of the remains yielded the case's next critical breakthrough. Advanced DNA analysis confirmed what the gold signet ring had already suggested. The remains were indeed those of Corey Reynolds and Devon Clark. Both young men had suffered similar fractures to the skull, consistent with blunt force trauma. The medical examiner determined these injuries were the likely cause of death, inflicted by a heavy object with a flat striking surface, possibly a large wrench or a quarry hammer. More importantly, microscopic analysis of the bone fractures indicated the fatal blows had been delivered from behind, suggesting the young men had been attacked unexpectedly, likely while walking. The positioning of the remains told us something important. Dr. Elena Roth, the forensic anthropologist who led the examination, explained. They weren't simply dumped in the pit. They were deliberately arranged side by side, almost as if in repose. This suggests the perpetrator knew them personally. There was a level of care in how they were positioned that you don't typically see in stranger homicides. Perhaps the most crucial evidence came from technology that hadn't existed in 1985. Soil samples collected from around the remains contained microscopic granite dust and trace elements that modern forensic techniques could analyze with extraordinary precision. The granite dust, a rare type mined exclusively at the Northgate Quarry in the 1980s, provided a direct link to the location. But it was the presence of a specific type of industrial sealant, one used exclusively by Vance Quarry operations for their heavy machinery maintenance in the 1980s, that provided the most significant lead. This particular sealant contained a unique chemical signature, as the company had used a proprietary formula. Access to this sealant was restricted to specific personnel, primarily maintenance supervisors and the owner. Cross-referencing employment records from 1985 with the list of persons of interest from the original investigation produced a name that had appeared only peripherally in the initial case files: Silas Vance. Silas Vance, the 79-year-old former owner of Vance Quarry Operations, had lived in plain sight for 38 years. To his neighbors, Vance was the quintessential quiet, elderly man, now living alone after his wife passed away in 2019. What no one in Blackwood Lake County realized was that Silas Vance had been hiding in plain sight, carrying the secret of the young men's fate while participating in the very community their disappearance had traumatized. The arrest came at dawn on October 25, 2023, 13 days after the discovery at Northgate Quarry. A tactical team surrounded Vance's home while he slept, using a bullhorn to order him outside. Sheriff James Wilson, flanked by state police and the district attorney, confirmed what many found difficult to comprehend. Silas Vance had been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The community's reaction was immediate and visceral. It was like a collective gut punch. Everyone had their theories about the case, but no one imagined it could be someone who'd been among them all along. The arrest sparked painful self-examination throughout Blackwood Lake County. How had Vance avoided suspicion for nearly half a century? The search of Vance's home yielded the physical evidence needed to secure an indictment. In a locked metal safe in his workshop, investigators found a small, leather-bound journal. In entries spanning the 1980s, Vance had meticulously documented his intense anger at trespassers on his quarry property, culminating in a detailed, though veiled, entry for June 28, 1985, describing a permanent solution to the problem. Most incriminating was the discovery of Corey Reynolds's wallet, stripped of its cash and IDs, hidden in a false bottom of the safe. DNA analysis confirmed microscopic blood residue inside the wallet belonged to Corey. The wallet had been kept as a trophy for 38 years. The trial of Silas Vance began in March 2024. The prosecution presented a methodical case, building a timeline that connected Vance to the young men's disappearance through the unique industrial sealant found on the remains and his own documented rage at trespassers. The defense, recognizing the overwhelming evidence, focused primarily on Vance's age and mental capacity. After just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with unanimous guilty verdicts on both counts of first-degree murder. Judge Maria Lopez sentenced Vance to 2 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole, noting, "No passage of time diminishes the gravity of this crime. Justice may have been delayed, but it will not be denied." For the Clark and Reynolds families, the conviction brought closure. Thomas Clark, who had dedicated his life to finding his son, lived just long enough to see their killer brought to justice, passing away peacefully 6 weeks after the sentencing. The families established a foundation in their sons' names, dedicated to supporting cold case investigations across Maine. The foundation provides grants for advanced forensic testing and specialized training for rural law enforcement agencies, ensuring that other families might find answers sooner than they did. This case proves justice can come even after 38 years. If you want to hear more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who enjoys a deep dive into an unsolved mystery.